Hi everyone, I'm Peter Bhatia, class of 75. I was a reporter and a columnist on the Daily. I wasn't a masthead editor or anything. Touchdown! Let's go. Yeah, good. As long as we beat the Weenies tomorrow, everything is good in the world. But, I worked on the Daily mainly as a reporter and columnist. I actually pioneered a column on intramural sports because we covered the heck out of course, the athletic teams, and there were all these amazing people playing intramurals, some of whom had been D1 athletes, and now we're in biz school, and we're kicking the butts of undergrads and things like that. But one of my favorite memories was I did a paper line thing where I played on this intramural basketball team that was truly horrible. And they were all from Rinconada, because the name of the team was something like Rink 69 or something like that. And they didn't have anybody who could even dribble a basketball, and they were getting beat by like 100 points a game. So it's probably the only game in my basketball history where I scored in double figures. But, and the other guys they were playing were really kind of awful about it and running up the score, so I really made fun of them in the Daily the next day. Oh, and
he was also a referee.
That's true. I did do that with Charlie, yeah. And today I'm the editor of the Detroit Free Press. I've been in journalism since I walked off campus in summer of 1975. Reporter, editor, worked all over the country, editor of several papers, former president of the American Society of Newspaper Editors, and I read everything that Ivan Mizell writes.
I'm Tim Grieve. I am the VP for News at McClatchy, which owns 30 newsrooms, 30 newspapers, 30 news properties, whatever you want to call them, across America, from the Miami Herald, the Sacramento Bee, the Charlotte Observer. I could go on and on. We'd be here and leave out one of the kids, and that would be embarrassing, so I won't. I'm actually going to leave so that we can go talk about partnership monetization for the rest of the day, so enjoy yourselves. It's been great. Exactly. I was the editor-in-chief of the Daily in 1985, which seems a very long time ago. You were at the Daily when the football team was good. My first big game was the big game. So it was a different era at Stanford. I should have planned ahead this whole favorite memory of the Stanford Daily thing. As I was running through them just now, I realized my favorite memories were not the stories we covered or the journalism we did. It was the activities with the people there, and I'm trying to think of one that is not a career-ending injury to repeat here. So a couple that come to mind. We developed something on deadline, which was a loosely enforced word, called the hurry up dance. So we would stand next to this reporter, David Azrin, a chronically late writer, and jump up and down and shout, "Hurry up." Professional thing we did. Charlie Goffin, who my guess is watching on a live stream, I did throw a chair at him once. These are not career-ending injuries. This gives you the scale of the things I could be talking about. If you worked on the Daily, you remember those gigantic blue 400-pound metal chairs? They were dangerous weapons. Maybe my favorite memory, though, involves one of my friends on the panel across the way, the much less good panel across the way, Art Stryber, who's gone on to become a famous and very successful photographer. Art and I were driving across campus one day together, I don't know why, when we heard on the fire radio or something, or saw that there was a fire at the basketball coach's house. And so we raced to the basketball coach's house. His house was in fact on fire in a small way. And his wife was outside, and a firefighter came out with his wife's purse on a shovel from the ruins of whatever room it had been in. And Stryber, being the tenacious photographer he did, jumped in. He got the perfect shot of the shovel being handed, and moments later discovered there was no film in his camera. So it's a metaphor in there somewhere.
What's film?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is John Kosner. I was a lightly read sports columnist in 1981 and 1982. Ivan Mizell was my sports editor, and he's here today. Then I ran ESPN digital media for about 15 years. Ramona Shelburne, who's right behind Ivan, and Ivan were colleagues at ESPN. I had a great time writing for the Daily, and all the remarks that the current leadership made in the other room resonate with me because it was just fun to be part of that effort. I remember getting to write a column at the time. Our basketball team was not very good, and I wrote a column predicting that we would upset UCLA, which was considered crazy at the time, and I got mocked on campus, and then we did upset UCLA. So I didn't, I I never remarked further about that, but that was one memory that I had.
Hi, my name is Jay Hamilton. I'm a professor in the communication department. I direct the journalism program. I write about media markets, and I have no connection to the Stanford Daily, except I'm really fortunate that I get to read the Daniel Pearl internship applications each year. And I'm really amazed to see the journalism that the Stanford undergrads are producing, and the clips usually come from the Daily, and I know that they're getting great instruction from the editors. The clips also come from the Reveille internships that are funded by Mr. Reveille, and so if you're a Stanford undergrad, you can get $5,000 to write for any newspaper in the country. And what that has meant is that there are now people from the late 80s, early 1990s who have great careers in journalism because they worked at the Daily and because they did the Reveille internships. I know I'm not teaching them how to write like that in my class, so it has to come from somewhere. So I really appreciate all the things that you all do as editors.
Great. So kicking things off, just to level set, it'd be great if you guys could share a little bit about the financial reality, given we know that financial realities, the financial state of the union has changed for newspapers. If you could share materially what that's meant from a business standpoint at different places you've been and materially in your own career. How's this transpired in the newsroom and then within your own career?
I'm looking at you.
Yeah, okay. Well, the sense about a newspaper editor or what would you call property, a newspaper site, news site editor, whatever we are today. And, we get into this line of work, we get into this because of the passion we have for journalism. I don't think that's diminished at all. But obviously, the number of us who can pursue that passion for journalism has declined markedly. I used to run news organizations of 400 plus people. There are about 5 left that have that many people in them. Most big newsrooms now are around 100 people, although there are exceptions in places like Minneapolis and Dallas, and of course the big national guys. The Washington Post, as we all know, has been famously written about, is growing. Even though they're telling all these awful lies about Judge Moore. But, and if you believe that, yeah. Anyway, so it's profoundly changed what we can do. I mean, the good news is, from my perspective, is there is still great journalism being done across this country every day at newspapers and at news organizations, large and small. The spirit of watchdog and enterprise reporting, that was a big reason a lot of us got into this in the first place. Even if I wrote a goofy I Am column back at the Daily, I'm an investigative journalist at heart. And the ability to do that work, even though there aren't as many people to do the work, is as important and is what drives us as much as anything. But I didn't get into this profession and I didn't go into leadership. Really all I aspired to be was a reporter, and somehow ended up running news organizations. I'm still a little mystified by that, but I didn't get into it to, over the course of the last decade, having to lay off close to 100 people at 3 different places. That is the reality. So we've had to recalibrate a lot. Obviously, good partnerships aside, our industry has been through a tremendously tumultuous time. And that continues, and it touches everybody. But our dating myself by using a Star Trek reference, our prime directive remains to be of service to our communities, and that's still going on. I don't want, with all the doom and gloom around the news gathering industries, that shouldn't be lost. There's still amazing work being done across this country every day on multiple platforms. There's the annual NY Doc, or I don't think that's quite the right name, but the New York Documentary Film Festival is going on as we speak. There are several productions in that came out of journalism-based newsrooms. We're finding ways to do great work in a variety of ways, and that's still important.
Yeah, I think that's really key, that the great work is still happening. We have to be much more focused than we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When Peter and I worked at the Sacramento Bee and I was a young reporter there, somehow I convinced them to send me to Flint, Michigan to write about the movie Roger and Me. And as a twofer, I convinced them to let me do a story about the Second City comedy troupe in Chicago. I'm not sure how that saved money for me to go to Chicago and do that. I think I actually left the Beat having never written the second story, but that was sort of a day and a time when we just did stuff like that. And in retrospect, I'm not really sure why we did, because there were plenty of other places you might have gotten that information, and I don't know that I did a uniquely good job or had a uniquely relevant perspective on those stories. So we just have to be much more careful about the core mission that we can serve and that we can do well. And as Peter said, I think the cool thing is, as we narrow to that focus, we're still doing that part really well in our individual communities. I'm just thinking about our own newsrooms over the last few months. In the last week, the Kansas City Star has run this phenomenal series about how Kansas, the state government in Kansas, is possibly the most secretive state government in the country, and how that is affecting people there. The Fresno Bee is in an ongoing war with the local school district and with religious conservatives there because they're writing a series of stories about the incredibly high teen birth rates in the San Joaquin Valley and what role sex education in the schools, the failing sex education in the schools is having there. It's been very tough. The leader of the school board is on a jihad against our reporter there with the whole fake news, the full Donald Trump playbook. He is visiting upon this reporter. The Miami Herald has an incredible series of stories inside the youth prison system in Florida, where they discovered that guards actually pay inmates to beat up other inmates, and this is captured on video. The Charlotte Observer 4 times in the last year has sued to get body cam videos of police-involved shootings, one each time. And has the results of those. So that core mission of holding our leaders in government accountable, I think we're still doing that really well, but we have to be incredibly careful that we're using that most precious resource we have, the time and resources of our journalists, on that kind of work and not on work, that stupid stuff I did when I was a reporter.
I just would echo what Tim said. For me, I believe the key is the focus. And you have to think about the world that you're actually in versus where we've come from. The internet has totally democratized voices. There's now more content available than anybody could possibly read. So if you're a newspaper or professional publication, what is it that you are offering that's unique? I loved Ada's story list over the last 2 weeks, because that's a demonstration of what you have to do. And locally getting into the right stories, and I believe also being of service to your audience is critically important. There's a sadness of what's been lost, but it's important to understand that going forward, the only thing that matters is what people are going to be willing to pay for. So you have to ask yourself, as you launch these stories or put your budget together, is that something that is of interest to you, or is it of interest to the audience? And how do you begin to sort of cultivate that more? Ultimately, the focus may be a good thing for where the industry goes.
So 60 years ago, a Stanford economist named Anthony Downs published an influential book called An Economic Theory of Democracy. And in that book, he said, we all have 4 information demands in our lives: as consumers, as workers, as audience members, and as voters. And the first 3 information demands work pretty well, because if you don't seek out the information, you don't get the benefit. So if I asked everybody, what time is the big game tomorrow? The answer would be exactly. And if I asked you the impact of the Republican Senate tax bill on your life, you would say yeah, we call that rational ignorance. That was the phrase that Anthony Downs coined. He said, because your vote doesn't matter in a statistical sense, from an investment perspective, most people don't follow the details of politics. Now they do, for the reasons I would call the 3 Ds, duty, diversion, and drama. Some people feel they have a duty to become informed. For some people, the PBS NewsHour is as interesting as ESPN. That's about 1%. Don't try to build your audience around that. And then for some people, it's drama, the horse race, who's ahead, who's behind. What that means, that rational ignorance, it sets up a gap between what people need to know as citizens and what they want to know as consumers. So that's sort of the demand side. On the supply side, there are 5 incentives that lead to the creative information creation. One is pay me, that's subscription. One is I want to sell your attention, that's advertising. One is I want to change how you think about the world, that's nonprofit. One is I want your vote, that's partisan. And one is I just like to talk, that's expression, that's social media. And I think what we've seen over the last 10 years is a reweighting of those incentives, especially in journalism. Google and Facebook do such a great job with targeting that they've taken a lot of the advertising revenue. Craig is a great guy, the classified advertisements went away. And so what you're looking at now is a heavier weight on subscription and on nonprofit.
Great.
And that was meant to be optimistic.
Indeed, it was. One thing, we had a meeting before this last week, and we wanted to make sure, and all of the guys echoed like how they didn't want the panel to be about doom and gloom and how there was so much hope and optimism. So to that end, let's not talk about doom and gloom. Can you share what is working from either a business model standpoint or what company would you bet on? What is working, and any best practices, success stories you can share?
I would just say the downside of the loss of localism is you now can serve everybody everywhere. And certainly, the great publications been mentioned now have global audiences. That's only going to increase. The other thing is that to the extent that you cultivate better the audience you have, and you can do that directly through your stories, you could do it through your correspondence. Ramona, who I mentioned, has 242,000 followers on Twitter. This is a modern world. What reporters and publications tend to, what they do with their following is very, very important. I don't know, about 15 years ago or so, two basketball players for the Charlotte Hornets were drag racing by their arena, and one died. His name was Bobby Phills. And we had an executive editor, a legendary guy at our place named John Walsh. And he said, why don't you ask the readers for their memories of Bobby Phills? We're national at ESPN. It was amazing. Countless replies. And we brought that back in several times. And it was a reminder to us that the audience is out there, wants to be engaged, and it gave them a special sort of connection with who we were. The best publications are going to more prioritize that, do more of that, and I believe they will benefit from it.
And I think related to that, the places that are going to succeed, the places that are going to succeed, are the ones that truly give you something you cannot get anywhere else. And that is a harder and harder and harder thing to do. I think of lots of information, thanks to Google. You don't even actually have to go to a website to get. You type it into your search bar, and Google provides you the result for the movie listings or the baseball standings or whatever. So there's not even a publication behind that at all. It's just at Google. But ESPN in sports, Politico, where I used to work, provided people something that they just couldn't get anywhere else, a level of reporting and detail on politics, and so people went there. Politico Pro, a subscription model that we launched, provided such an inside level of detail about the politics of certain public policy issues that companies were willing to pay a huge amount of money, $10,000 or more a year, to subscribe to that. We in the local journalism world have to get to that point, not that we're going to get $10,000 a year, but have to get to that point where what we are providing is so essential to people. The part that they can't get anywhere else, I think, is almost built in if we're doing it right, because there just isn't anyone else doing this work. But we have to make it so compelling that they actually can't live without it, and at that point they will pay for it. We don't do that as well as we should.
But then you're saying that there's a difference level of access again to the 1%, right, the information?
Well, if it's the sort of information that a lobbyist needs to do this job, that I guess I would say the sort of information we were doing there that cost $10,000 largely would not have been interesting to the vast majority of people. It was such a level of minute, hey, this lobbyist is in the senator's office right now. We couldn't even make sense of what that meant. But a lobbyist from the other side might think, oh, Jesus, that's a bad thing, and I need to act on that. So it's that level of information.
Yeah, I think it's, for those of us who, we all work in some sort of niche, whatever it might be. So for those of us at the Detroit Free Press, for example, our niche is local news, things that Detroiters care about. And of course, you're talking about a vast metropolitan area with every conceivable demographic, with incredible affluence and incredible poverty. And a place that's sports crazy with 4 professional sports teams in Michigan with what's his name as coach and Michigan State and so on. I mean, there are all these different niches for us to go after, and if we are successful in owning those niches, which we are moderately successful at but have much more work to do, then we have an opportunity to build a model on a variety of levels, both from sales but also digital sales and some corporate things. We're part of Gannett, so there's some corporate initiatives as part of that. Gannett's testing right now a adless format for you can, if you pay a lot more, you can get access to USA Today online without any advertising, and so that's a whole new revenue model that I think is going to be pretty successful, and that hopefully will spread out to the rest of the company at some point. So there are all these things we're experimenting with, and we have to find, there's been so much, I know we're not doing gloom and doom, but there's been so much gloom and doom around, there's no model because of everything we've already heard, classifieds gone, et cetera, but, and we're not the New York Times nor the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal for the rest of us. We don't have the same kind of audience and the same kind of effect, and frankly, we don't get the Trump bump either that the Times and the Post have gotten, but there's still opportunities for us, and we just have to keep experimenting and throwing things against the wall. One of the things Tim has done famously and brilliantly throughout his career is throwing things against the wall and found things that work that nobody else has thought of, both as I'm not talking about the Flint story necessarily, but
I thought you meant the chair.
Yeah, well, the chair too. Now that you mention it, I saw a chair go flying across the newsroom once too. Now that I think about it, thrown by a former Stanford Daily staffer, but we won't go there. Anyway, I think there are ways. It's not going to be easy, and in fact, it's quite the opposite of easy. It's very, very hard.
I think something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
I think something really that is interesting and challenging has happened is the way most people consume information now, the way we all consume information now, is through social media, through search. The number of people who go to the homepage of a newspaper site is phenomenally small. At our in our chain, something like 95% of the people who see a story from one of our publications in any given month did not see the homepage of that publication. 95%. So they're coming through Google or Facebook or Bleacher Report or wherever they are, or their friends' emails or wherever they have to find it. And that means that every story is fighting for readership on a story-by-story, sort of hand-to-hand combat way. And what you learn is people are interested in stories, very specific stories or niches. And I think it is challenging to find an audience of people who are interested in what happens in Palo Alto. They might be interested in what happens with the Stanford football team or with the Stanford lacrosse team or with women's issues on campus or with crime in a certain neighborhood or whatever. But finding that sort of general, I'm going to come to the non-existent now, daily newspaper, still non-existent, maybe non-existent daily newspaper in Palo Alto and learn about sort of what happened here, I think is a dying thing, a hard thing. We can't really base our model on that. We have to base our model on serving these smaller niches.
Well, one thing that makes me optimistic is the opening up of a new field called computational journalism. It's a clunky term, but the way I think about it is stories by, through, and about algorithms. So stories by algorithm, when quarterly earnings reports come out now, the Associated Press uses software from Automated Insights to write 4,000 stories automatically, taking the data from the reports. In the days when those were manual stories, 300 were written. So they've expanded the number of companies that can be covered, and that Stanford Business School professors have a study that shows that changes the trading volume, so you can write about smaller companies. Stories through algorithms, that's electronic tip generation, actually spotting patterns of institutional breakdowns. Last year, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was a Pulitzer finalist for a report that actually used machine learning. They were trying to write about sexual abuse among doctors, and they wrote a scraper that got data from all 50 medical societies or regulatory bodies. They had 100,000 disciplinary records. They wrote a model using keywords that reduced that 100,000 record set to 6,000 cases that they thought sexual abuse was going on, and they were able to then write a story about how doctors convicted of sexual abuse were still practicing. So stories by algorithms, stories through algorithm, and then stories about algorithms. That's a big local focus. ProPublica was a Pulitzer finalist last year for a series called Machine Bias. And in that, what they were basically doing was reverse engineering algorithms that companies were using, like Princeton Review. What ProPublica did was they simulated being a student from all around the country by using different zip codes and simulations, and they found that controlling for income, Princeton Review charged a higher price for students with a neighborhood with a higher Asian percentage. They also did the same thing with machine bias and race with Facebook, and they found, for instance, that they were able to place ads for housing services electronically with Facebook and say, please don't show this ad to African Americans or Hispanics. That violated the 1968 Fair Housing Act. So it's really amazing that that's become